The world remembers generals, presidents, and martyrs, but some names are buried beneath the bullets, hatred, and silence of history. And sometimes, those names belong to men who faced more danger than any soldier and more betrayal than any king. Mississippi, 1875. Christmas Day. A black senator walks calmly into a store. He is offered a drink. He hesitates, but agrees. Moments later, a signal, a gunshot, then 40 more. The killers ensure their hate is truly represented by the number of shots. As he bleeds, he asks to be taken outside because he wants to die like a man, standing, proud, unbroken. He fixes his clothes, looks his assassins in the eye, and utters a sentence that history tried to forget. Remember, when you kill me, you kill a gentleman and a brave man. Never say you killed a coward. Who was this man? Why did the Ku Klux Klan fear him more than any army? And why has America forgotten him? In this video, let's uncover the buried legend of Senator Charles Caldwell, the bravest, baddest black man you have never heard of. Mississippi in the 1830s was a killing ground with rules written in blood. It wasn't merely a slaveholding state. It was the empire of cotton, and cotton didn't grow without sweat, screams, and shattered families. This was the Deep South's engine of profit, fueled by human lives. And it was here, in this crucible of cruelty, that Charles Caldwell was born, not into life, but into ownership, into a world where a black child's first breath was already taxed by white hands. Slavery in Mississippi wasn't just labor, it was annihilation. The phrase "sold down the river" didn't come from poetry. It was a death sentence. Men and women from Virginia, Maryland, and the Carolinas were routinely sold into the lower South, to Mississippi, to Louisiana, where sugar and cotton killed faster than bullets. The average enslaved man on a Mississippi cotton plantation didn't survive a decade. Some didn't survive a year. This was a place where shackles left permanent grooves in flesh, where overseers used whips the way carpenters use hammers, where families were torn apart in auctions without names. And yet, within this nightmare, Caldwell endured. He wasn't given freedom. He stole survival. Somehow, in the noise of chain gangs and the wailing of children sold from their mother's arms, he found skill. He learned the heat, the rhythm, the danger of the forge. Blacksmithing became his lifeline. This skill gave him something rare, a sliver of autonomy. In a world where enslaved men had nothing, Caldwell had fire and iron. And with every strike of the hammer, he shaped not just tools, but the foundations of a future no one believed a black man could ever claim. He became respected among whites for his craft, but he never forgot who he was. Behind the anvil, a storm was growing. He was planning, watching, waiting. And then his life took a fortunate turn. The Civil War had ended. But in Mississippi, the end of slavery felt less like freedom and more like a fire alarm in a burning house. Plantations smoldered, but the old power didn't vanish. It scattered like ash into the wind and reformed elsewhere. The Confederacy may have lost the battlefield, but it simply changed arenas. The new war wasn't for territory. It was for the soul of America. And Charles Caldwell stepped into that new war with iron in his spine. He didn't wait for an invitation. He wasn't grateful to be allowed into politics. He kicked down the doors of a system that had once branded him livestock and sat in its chambers as a lawmaker. The year was 1868. Mississippi called a constitutional convention to draft a new governing document. The old order was dead. Reconstruction demanded something better. 17 black men showed up at that convention, and one of them, fierce-eyed, heavy-voiced, and uncompromising, was Charles Caldwell. To white Mississippians, this was a cosmic insult. Slaves weren't supposed to write laws. They were supposed to obey them. And yet there Caldwell stood, not just rewriting the rules of the plantation, but scrapping them altogether. He wasn't interested in moderation. He didn't care for compromise. He was a radical Republican and proud of it. In those days, radical didn't mean fringe. It meant righteous defiance. Radical meant believing that black people had rights not because they were granted by Congress, but because they were born human. Caldwell wasn't just at the convention to sign his name and smile for the camera. He pushed, he argued, he demanded. He helped lay the foundations for public education, equal protection under the law, and voting rights for black men. It was, at the time, the most audacious act of self-determination Mississippi had ever seen. But the real revolution came 2 years later, in 1870. Charles Caldwell ran for a seat in the Mississippi State Senate. This wasn't a symbolic run. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was a black man, once enslaved, running for the highest legislative body in a state that just 5 years earlier had declared war to keep him in chains. And he won. He didn't win in Boston or New York. He didn't win in some progressive abolitionist enclave. He won in Mississippi, the belly of the beast. When he walked into the state capitol as Senator Caldwell, he wasn't walking into history. He was walking into enemy territory. The halls were still lined with men who called him boy. The desks still smelled of the cigars smoked by planters who once auctioned people like him. But Caldwell was unmoved. He walked in like he owned the place, not because he was arrogant, but because he knew he belonged, and he didn't waste time. He voted to ratify the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed citizenship and equal protection for Black Americans. He voted for the 15th Amendment, which secured black men the right to vote, at least on paper. He pushed legislation to create schools for black children, to establish legal protections against racial violence, and to fund economic opportunities that had never before existed for freedmen. But every word he spoke in that Senate chamber put a target on his back. White Democrats didn't just disagree with him, they considered his existence in the Capitol a crime against God. To them, the very idea that a black man could legislate was a declaration of war. They didn't just hate his policies, they hated his audacity, and the Ku Klux Klan didn't fear the vote. They feared the enforcer, and Caldwell was an enforcer of a new world. He was a symbol that the war wasn't truly over unless justice was won. He walked with pride, but never with arrogance. He carried himself like a statesman, but moved like a soldier. He never hid his face. He never softened his words. He never apologized for breathing free air. In a time when black men were being lynched for looking a white man in the eye, Caldwell stood on the Senate floor and told Mississippi that he was here to stay. People whispered about him in the streets. White supremacists plotted in smoky parlors, wondering how to take him down. But Caldwell didn't blink. He had already faced slavery. He had already fought through Reconstruction violence. He had already risen from the ashes of a system designed to crush him. What could bullets take from a man who had already been denied everything? And yet, he knew. Deep down, he knew. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being silenced. But in that Capitol, every vote he cast was a shout through time. Every speech he gave was a thunderclap against the quiet obedience white power had expected of black men. Charles Caldwell didn't just serve Mississippi. He rewrote what it meant to be a black leader in America. And for that, they marked him. Not for being corrupt, not for being weak, but for being free, proud, and unshakably righteous. And in a land still haunted by the ghosts of chains, that kind of power was the most terrifying thing of all. And that's when white supremacists began to finally think practically, to not just remove him, but end him. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. On September 4th, 1875, the town of Clinton, nestled just 10 miles west of Jackson, became the epicenter of a political earthquake. Charles Caldwell, now a respected state senator and still carrying the iron of slavery in his memory, organized a Republican rally to mobilize black voters ahead of the state elections. It was one of the largest political events of the Reconstruction era. 2,000 black families, formerly enslaved people, sharecroppers, educators, Preachers and Civil War veterans gathered not in fear, but in defiance. The rally was held at Moss Hill, a withered former plantation that now served as a venue for Black assembly. That alone was symbolic. The same grounds where generations of Black men and women had been whipped, sold, and buried, now echoed with speeches about civil rights, voting, and the Constitution. Children laughed, women sang, elders clutched Bibles. The smell of fried chicken, roasted corn, and fresh bread filled the air. In those hours, Mississippi didn't belong to the Confederacy. It belonged to the people who had survived it. But not everyone came to celebrate. In the shadows, leaning on fence posts and sipping from whiskey bottles, stood the White Liners, a paramilitary arm of the Democratic Party. These weren't men with opposing views. These were ex-Confederate soldiers, bitter and armed, trained to kill, and eager to make sure Reconstruction failed by any means necessary. They watched the rally the way a wolf watches a lamb, not with curiosity, but with hunger. Still, Charles Caldwell tried to show civility. He didn't want blood. He didn't want a riot. So in a gesture few today would dare to make, he invited a white Democratic speaker, Amos R. Johnston, to take the stage. It was bold, risky. But Caldwell believed that even in Mississippi, dialogue was better than death. Johnston spoke for over an hour, uninterrupted. And then, it ended. Or so it seemed. Because as soon as H.T. Fisher, a white Republican and newspaper editor, stepped up to speak on behalf of Black voters, the mask slipped. He was met with jeers, threats, then gunfire. It wasn't a riot. It was a premeditated massacre. Shots came from the tree line, the bushes, and the ridges behind the rally. Panic erupted. Mothers grabbed their children. Men threw themselves over their wives. People screamed and scattered, but there was nowhere to run. One survivor described it as bullets raining from the heavens. Others called it a trap, an ambush, a culling. Over 35 Black men, women, and children were killed that day. Some say over 50. 2 were children. One was found clutching a crushed biscuit in one hand and his mother's torn shawl in the other. His spine had been shattered. 3 white men died, all in crossfire or by accident. But the death toll wasn't the most chilling part. The aftermath was. Because this was not over. Mayor W.L. Dunning, instead of calling for calm, sent out messages for assistance. That night, trains began arriving from nearby counties. Hundreds of armed White Liners disembarked like soldiers entering a battlefield. But this wasn't a battlefield. It was a Black town. And they didn't come for order. They came for revenge. For days, Black homes were raided, men dragged into the streets, women assaulted, children terrorized. Some were shot while hiding under beds. Others were hanged from the very trees where their ancestors had once been sold. Wells were poisoned and farms burned. Sarah Ann Dickey, a white Northern teacher working in Clinton, wrote in her journal that it felt like the gates of hell had opened. White Republican leaders weren't spared. Judge William Hoffa, a man known for mediating racial disputes, was lynched from a pine tree outside his home. His only crime, trying to keep peace. And where was the federal government? Governor Adelbert Ames, seeing the massacre unfold, wired President Ulysses S. Grant, begging for troops. He wasn't asking for politics. He was asking for human lives to be saved. But Grant, politically fatigued and under pressure to stop meddling in the South, did nothing. Clinton was left to burn in silence. And Charles Caldwell? He survived. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He stayed. He stood in the ruins of the community he tried to uplift and kept leading. But something in the air had shifted. Something darker. Something final. Because to the white supremacists of Mississippi, Charles Caldwell was no longer just a Black senator. He was a symbol of what they feared most. Black leadership that wouldn't back down. He was now more than a man. He was a threat that had to be eliminated. He was not supposed to survive the Clinton massacre. But he did. And that survival alone made him dangerous. He had walked through blood, stood on broken ground, and faced down the violent machinery of white supremacy. But he kept speaking, kept organizing, kept marching through towns where just his presence made racists shiver. They couldn't stop him at the ballot box. They couldn't silence him in the Senate. So they resorted to the weapon that built their world, a bullet. By December 1875, the message was clear. Black political power would no longer be tolerated. Federal troops had withdrawn. The Republican Party in Mississippi was isolated. And Charles Caldwell, outspoken, radical, defiant, was the final symbol of everything the Confederacy had tried and failed to destroy. Then came Christmas Day. In most homes, children played by candlelight and families carved meat by fire. But in Clinton, a plot simmered in the basement of a local store. Caldwell had spent the day checking on his nephew, who had been threatened earlier. On his way home, a familiar face stopped him. Buck Cabell, a man Caldwell trusted, invited him to raise a glass for Christmas. A peace offering, a friendly toast. Caldwell hesitated. He had already made it clear. He wanted to go home, be with his wife, rest. But sometimes, courage has blind spots. And Caldwell had spent his life confronting danger head-on. This moment was no different. He entered Chilton's store, walked into the basement, and lifted a glass. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The glasses touched. A sharp, ringing clink. A bullet pierced the back of his skull. He collapsed, but not completely. He was still alive, still breathing. Blood poured down his coat. But even then, Caldwell didn't panic. His voice was calm, firm, unshaken. "Carry me outside," he said. "Let me die like a man." They obeyed, maybe out of shame, maybe to watch him fall. But Caldwell rose. He straightened his blood-soaked jacket, fixed his collar, and stood on his feet. In front of the very men who tried to break him, he declared, "Remember, when you kill me, you kill a gentleman and a brave man. Never say you killed a coward." Then it happened. 40 rifles, 40 shots, one man. They opened fire until his body stopped moving. Not because it surrendered, but because it had no more blood to give. And even then, the cruelty didn't stop. That night, white liners broke into his home. They found the coffin where his wife had gently placed his body alongside his brother Samuel, who was also murdered that night. They flipped it, mocked the corpses, spat on them, cursed them, because cowards always wait for their enemies to stop breathing before pretending to be brave. No arrests were made, no trials held, not even a whisper of justice. The state of Mississippi buried Caldwell in silence. But silence cannot bury a man like Charles Caldwell. The white elite of Mississippi killed Charles Caldwell's body, but they could never kill what he represented. A black man born in chains, who rewrote the laws of his oppressors. A former slave who became a state senator, voted on national amendments, and protected his community with grit and resolve. Caldwell wasn't just a politician. He was the nightmare of the Old South. Black, proud, armed with law and literacy, and absolutely unwilling to be afraid. His legacy is both inspiring and tragic. Inspiring because it shows what is possible. Tragic because it shows what white supremacy is willing to do to stop it. Historians tried to erase him. State records buried him under riots and unrest. But his memory lived on in whispers, in sermons, in stories, in every black child taught to stand tall no matter what. Because Caldwell was proof. Proof that Reconstruction was not just a dream. It was a reality that terrified the white elite so much, they destroyed it with bullets, lynchings, and horror campaigns. And his final words still echo like a war drum. "Never say you killed a coward." This wasn't just bravery. It was revolutionary dignity, the kind that can't be killed with guns. What do you think? If a formerly enslaved man like Charles Caldwell could fight the Ku Klux Klan with nothing but courage and conviction, what's stopping us now? Why do we know the names of rappers and ball players, but not the names of Black warriors who literally died for our freedom? In the comment section below, share your thoughts on what Charles being shot 40 times reveals about how white supremacists fear strong Black people. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.